Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. This story starts with a decade of neighborly irritation, ignored boundaries, trashed streets, and a birthday gift deliberately withheld until it had turned brown and brittle. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with a turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. They let her birthday flowers rot, now karma arrived in a box. My neighbors are not nice people. To give you an example, they had their leaf bags sitting on their curb, which resulted in other inconsiderate people in the neighborhood putting their bags of dog crap in their leaf bags. I get that it's super annoying, but the neighbor, Jacques, didn't like it and just dumped the bags of crap onto the street. I didn't see it happen. Another neighbor told me after the fact, but it was a windy day, and the next day there was about 50 bags of dog crap blowing on my lawn. My husband and I were annoyed and cleaned up the bags and put them in our own garage. Jacques emptied his leaf bags again when they filled up, so we tried to make a point and gathered all the bags of dog crap up and put them in his driveway. He promptly put them on the street, even though he knew we were, albeit passively aggressively, sending a message. We then finally went to his house to talk to him and his wife about it. He responded, "It's not my crap," and shrugged. However, he stopped emptying the bags on the road. Fast forward to a year later and they get their own puppy. Instead of having the puppy pee on their own lawn, they head out their front door and walk onto my lawn. Not on the edge of my lawn. They have an extendable leash and the dog goes right up to the middle of ours. They have a huge front lawn, so it's not an issue of space. They just don't want the mess on their lawns. The whole family has obviously discussed this strategy because Jacques brings the dog over, as does his B-word wife, and their son does it too. After the dog has done its business, they walk back to their house and go inside. I've now caught them multiple times, so I finally put a "please do not walk on grass" sign on my lawn in an effort to politely say stop it. It slowed down, but doesn't stop. But while these are some annoying examples, the one that's bugged me the most was what happened about 10 years ago. I received a huge bouquet of flowers on my birthday from a friend who lives out of town. I didn't get the flowers on my birthday. Instead, over a week later, the neighbor's cleaning lady came over and rang my bell holding a big bouquet. I could barely see her head through the flowers. At this point, they were all wilted and pretty much dead. I was so upset. The neighbors had been home that entire time and just let them sit there in their house until the cleaning lady came in and brought them over. There was a card that clearly said my name. They were just being a-holes. Anyway, the tables have now turned. It's taken over 10 years, but revenge shall be mine. Because about a week ago, a package came in the mail and was delivered to my house. It is for them, the neighbors. I was about to open it when I saw it wasn't for me, and now I'm sitting and looking at it, wondering when I give it back to them. What's inside? I don't know. I hope it's something they've been anxiously waiting for. This is petty level 1000, and I can't tell you the high. I'd wait till they came over and asked about it. If they give you crap, tell them better late than never, and at least the delivery wasn't flowers. And our second story. Karen tried to have me fired for refusing to help her. So to start off, I used to work at a big warehouse store chain. Let's call it CJ's. I worked there for nearly 5 years, finally got fed up and had to leave. Now work at an amazing factory job and I love it. Been there a little over 8 months, which makes this story even more fascinating in a way. Yesterday, I was at CJ's getting groceries and talking to a couple of my old friends that still work there. I was wearing my factory uniform, clearly not wearing the red and blue that the workers at CJ's wear. My factory uniform is black. In walks an older woman that we all know of. Let's call her Karen. She was what you might call a problem customer. Nothing was ever what she liked. All the employees were idiots, etc. But she had a real hatred for the male employees. Why? Who knows? But she treated me and other male stock clerks horribly. Karen spots me talking to my friends, and Karen never liked me. Even though I had on a mask and again was wearing my factory uniform, she comes right on over, tells us we're all lazy workers, and that we don't get paid to stand around and talk. She then orders me to help her lift some cat litter into her cart. Me: "No, I don't work here anymore. Get someone else to do it." Karen: "Excuse me? You do work here. You've helped me in the past. Now help me get some cat litter." Me: "I haven't worked here in 8 months. I'm not doing anything." "One of these guys will help you." Indeed, the two guys I was talking to were literally standing right there. But that didn't please Karen. Karen, are you refusing to help a paying customer? I'll get you fired. At that point, I was rather fed up. I just smiled at her and said, okay, go ahead. Get me fired from here, you bee. That went as well as you'd expect, and she immediately went to the service desk. Minutes later, Karen came back with one of the managers. And who was the manager she got? The one I got along with extremely well when I worked there. As soon as they reach me, I hear her say, that's the one. Fire him for insulting me and not helping me. He just walked over and asked me how my new job was going. Karen's look? Priceless. You're better than me. If I'd endured a customer like that for years and had a chance to insult her freely, I would have called her much worse than the B word. I would have loved to have seen the surprised Pikachu face on Karen when the manager asked how you were doing at your job. And our next story. My disabled neighbor demanded my parking spot. I live in an apartment building where each unit gets one parking space in the garage. No exceptions, no upgrades, no extra slots. The whole place was designed like someone drew rectangles on graph paper and said, yep, that's enough for everyone. My designated spot happens to be the one closest to the elevator. Nothing fancy, but extremely convenient. I pay higher rent than other buildings in the area specifically because I wanted this spot. Parking in my part of town is a nightmare straight out of Dante. 2 weeks ago, the apartment manager knocked on my door. He gave me that overly polite smile he reserves for conversations he knows won't go well and said, I was hoping you'd be willing to give something up for one of our incoming tenants. I assumed he meant swapping spaces. I told him, sure, if she needs a closer one, that's fine. He shook his head, no, not swapping, giving up your space completely. I stared at him. Why would I do that? He explained that a disabled woman was moving in and used a van with a powered ramp. She apparently needed 2 spaces, one to park and one for the ramp to deploy safely. He said the building had no extra parking, so he was hoping I'd volunteer my spot. Absolutely not, I said. My parking space is part of my lease. You can't just remove it. He tried to guilt trip me, saying she really needs accommodation. I told him I sympathized, but the answer was still no. I wasn't going to be paying extra rent to circle the block every night. A week later, I came home and found a large van with disabled plates parked next to my spot. The ramp wasn't deployed, but the van was angled in a way that made entering my space annoying. I squeezed in as far from the van as possible, figuring the manager must have shuffled things around. The next morning at 7:30, my phone rang. A woman's voice said, "Hi, you're the car next to me? I need you to move." I was half asleep and irritated, but I went downstairs and moved my car so she could use the ramp. I didn't love being woken up early, but fine, one time. Except it didn't end there. She called again the next morning at 7:30, and the next. On the fourth day, she called at 5:30 a.m. The phone jolted me awake like a fire alarm. I answered with pure groggy disbelief. "Are you serious?" I asked. She said, "I have plans. Don't be a jackbutt. Come move your car." I told her I don't normally wake up until 8:30, and she needed to stop calling before then. She replied, "You're doing me a favor? You're the one in the way." That was when the sympathy switch flipped off. That evening at 5:30, I pulled into the garage and found her van parked diagonally across both her spot and mine. I couldn't even attempt to squeeze in. She deliberately blocked me out. I called her. When she answered, she said in a sing-song voice, "Isn't it annoying when you have to wait on someone?" I said, "You have 5 minutes to come move it or I'm calling a tow truck." "You wouldn't dare," she snapped, then hung up. So I dared. The tow truck arrived in about 30 minutes and hauled her van away. She didn't come down once during the entire ordeal, which told me she was either asleep, lying about her schedule, or assumed I'd cave. I didn't. At 6:30, she called, screaming. I hung up. She called again, still screaming. I hung up. Peace returned. 30 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find her and the apartment manager standing there like they were the moral police. She demanded, "What the hell were you thinking towing my van?" I replied, "That's what I'm supposed to do if someone blocks my parking space. I warned you." The manager chimed in, "We need to find a compromise." I told him, "No, we don't. My lease includes a parking spot." I didn't agree to be woken up before sunrise every day, and I certainly didn't agree to being blocked out entirely. She threw her hands up. "I was promised a spot I could use. What am I supposed to do?" I pointed at him. "You need to take that up with the person who promised it, not me." She spat out a final a-hole and stormed off with the manager trailing behind. I honestly do feel bad for her situation, but her issue isn't with me, it's with the building. The manager tried earlier to buy me out of my spot by offering reduced rent, but I refused because the trade-off wasn't worth it. I pay extra to avoid street parking hell, and I wasn't about to give it up because the building failed to plan for accessibility. A few days later, she was back. This time she parked by backing into her spot so the ramp opened toward the opposite side, the neighbor on her other side. I watched from a distance as she deployed the ramp directly into their space. Whether they agreed to this or she simply bullied them too, I don't know. But I recognized the pattern. She wasn't looking for a solution. She was looking for someone to sacrifice their spot for her convenience. Too bad for her, she already picked the one tenant who couldn't be guilt-tripped, manipulated, or strong-armed. I learned early on that when someone decides your boundaries don't matter, the only effective language left is consequences. And consequences in this case come with flashing lights, tow hooks, and a receipt stapled to the windshield. When someone repeatedly demonstrates that they do not respect your words, your boundaries, or your property, you stop using words. You use actions. You use the tow hook. Her sing-song, "Isn't it annoying?" comment came back to haunt her with the sound of a diesel engine and the clink of chains. And our last story. Our self-appointed HOA neighbor kept calling code enforcement on us for no reason. There's a neighbor on our street who's decided she is the self-appointed boss of everyone's property. She doesn't knock, doesn't walk over respectfully, doesn't announce herself like a normal adult. She stands in the middle of the street or on someone's lawn and shouts for them like she's calling a farm animal. She doesn't talk to people, she talks at them, loudly, rudely, and with this bizarre confidence that her opinion is law. Every neighbor has a story. Every neighbor is tired of her. Yesterday, she was out in the street yelling again. None of it sounded like something meant for me, so I ignored her and kept tending to my pets. I've lived in enough places to know that random yelling is usually someone high or having an episode, so I wasn't about to reward that energy with attention. But then she screeched something close enough to my name that I reluctantly looked up. My name's Missy, Misty, or Hey You. I don't respond to random syllables. When she finally had my attention, I told her plainly she cannot just stand in the street and yell for me like I'm a dog. She denied doing it. Even though several neighbors heard her and backed me up later, she immediately switched gears and started ordering us to cut vines and plants off the fence line between our yards. Never mind that the roots of everything she complained about were clearly coming from her side of the fence. She even threatened to call code enforcement if we didn't hop to it. My cousin got home later that day and, just to avoid pointless escalation, went out and cut the vines anyway. He handled everything, even though none of it originated on our property, but apparently compliance wasn't enough, because early this morning she called code enforcement anyway. Her justification? She didn't like being told she couldn't shout at us or step onto our property uninvited. When the code enforcement officer arrived, she started spouting nonsense about a barrel we keep for storing usable metal. According to her, we'd been using it for trash and collecting rainwater illegally. The officer took one look at the barrel, looked back at her, and even he seemed baffled by what she was talking about. It was obvious the complaint wasn't about actual violations, it was about her bruised ego. What irritates me most is that she has multiple visible code violations on her own property, but feels fully entitled to harass everyone else about theirs. While we were outside fixing the minor issues the officer asked us to address, she drove slowly past, glaring at us like she was waiting for a reaction. My husband finally yelled, "What do you want?" Instead of answering, she sped off right past her own driveway to make her little intimidation loop. It didn't even take a week for her to escalate again. 3 days after she called code enforcement on us for absolutely nothing, she filed another complaint, this time claiming we had dangerous debris on our property and were attracting pests. The officer who came out had already seen our place, and when he returned, you could tell he wasn't amused. Everything she complained about was either false, exaggerated, or clearly coming from her own yard. He documented that in the file. What she didn't know was that multiple other neighbors had grown tired of her behavior too. The woman across the street reported her for blocking the road with her car while shouting at people. Another neighbor submitted photos showing her dumping her garden waste onto shared property. Someone else notified the council that she had built an illegal extension on the back of her shed without any permits. All of these complaints landed at the same office within days of each other. So when code enforcement returned to her property, they weren't there to entertain her ego anymore. They were there with a clipboard and a list. The officer cited her for 3 separate violations: improper waste disposal, an unpermitted structure, and lack of maintenance on her own fence line, the very fence she had been screaming at us about. She tried to argue, but he shut her down immediately and warned her that continued harassment of neighbors would be documented and forwarded to the police. And then came the best part. The officer informed her that one more false report, one more harassment call, or one more attempt to trespass onto someone's property would result in a civil harassment case being opened against her. When he left her doorstep, she followed him into the street, shouting and demanding he cite us again. He ignored her, walked straight into his car, and drove off. Several neighbors watched it happen, and you could practically feel the satisfaction radiating through the cul-de-sac. Later that evening, while my husband and I were sitting outside, she drove by again, trying her usual intimidation tactic. But this time, instead of slowing down to glare, she sped up and wouldn't even look in our direction. She knew she'd finally crossed a line that she couldn't bully her way back from. The cease and desist letter we sent afterward was just the nail in the coffin. After it was delivered, she suddenly stopped yelling in the streets. She stopped trying to order people around. She stopped stepping onto anyone's property. And every time code enforcement drives through the neighborhood now, she practically disappears inside her house. For someone who spent so long barking orders at everyone else, it turns out she folds pretty quickly when the law starts barking back. Her entire approach was built on the assumption that nobody would challenge her. She got comfortable barking orders and weaponizing code enforcement because it usually made people scramble. But once her own behavior was held up to the same standard she tried to impose on others, the imbalance broke. The moment she had to meet the expectations she demanded from everyone else, she backed down. It's a predictable outcome for somebody who mistakes intimidation for authority. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.